So our topic for today is science and religion. Bum, 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 ending the battle. That shouldn't be confusing, right? That there's a battle between science and religion that seems to be going on, right? For me, and if I relate to any kind of news or social media, there's a regular and ongoing battle between, and it's kind of framed maybe in terms of liberalism versus conservatism or something like that. But if you peel back the layer, a lot of time it's really a battle between science and religion. I have a few ideas that I'd like to share with you today about how we might be able to end that battle. I don't know about once and for all. We Buddhists don't really believe in all that once and for all thing, but end the battle. So there are a lot of fun ways that this talk could have gone. I know, because this is one of those ones where I decided on the title and I was like, oh yeah, that's stuff I think about and read about and write about all week long. This will be easy. I'll just jot down some notes. Never say that to yourself. I don't necessarily believe in a personal and vindictive God until I say things like that to myself and I get punished for hubris. So, because there's a lot of angles, and I spent time on Wikipedia's about falsifiability versus verificationism. There's a difference between falsifiability and verificationism? Why, yes, my friends. Are you adherents of Kuhn's theories or Karl Popper's? Yeah. Who cares? Because epistemological pluralism is still a thing some cases, but don't confuse that with Descartes' dualism. And then you got to wade through the fake Einstein quotes. So I found your real one. And then I got some references that were like, oh, that sounds kind of like some stuff he said. Totally fake. It was a great quote too. I didn't leave it in here. It was like, oh, that's good. That would really tie the sermon together. And then you always double check. I learned this by quoting the Buddha. That's not what he said. All of that stuff, it's not what he said. Just look. So you always double check. So I had to go find new quotes. I got a good one from Carl Sagan in here. Okay, thanks for letting me check in. That was my joys and concerns. Check in. Excuse me. So now to the actual topic at hand, science and religion ending the battle. Okay, the first thing I would like to tell you, in case you didn't know, is that, I mean, some of us in a fellowship like this, we might go like, okay, yeah, science versus religion. I know which side I'm on. I'm on whichever one is like the progressive one, I mean, maybe I'm spiritual, but not religious. So the first thing I got to tell you is we are all religious. We are all religious. You may not know it, but I'm here to inform you that I don't like a you statement, so I'll use it for potency. You're all religious. Even the atheists, because we are all, as humans, we are all innately shouldists. You're all probably, unless you've really gone through a renounce, what do they call it in the Christian, there's a whole side of TikTok devoted to leaving the church and de-churchifying yourself and cult deprogramming yourself. But anyway, unless you've gone through the deprogramming, you're probably a member of the Church of Shouldiism. And yeah, it's an issue. We got to talk about this first of all. Some of you are only CEO members. You know that, right? Christmas and Easter only. I mean, I'm not a practicing shouldiist, but I still believe you should be a shouldiist. Others of us are deacons. Anyone been a deacon in the Church of Shouldiism? Yes. Some of us have gone all the way to bishop status. Yes, we can boss others around on how well they are shoulding or not. We've got should churches under our command. We are high-level shouldists. We're spreading our should all over the globe. Okay. Aside from just aiming toward that pun, what I want you to know is that we humans are wired to want to know what is right. We're wired. Part of us is like, and that's quite effective, actually. This is what leads largely to scientific thinking, scientific developments, is we want to know what's effective. We want to know what's going to work, what's functional. And we're also wired up. The way our little Homo sapiens primate brains are stitched together is that we think of that in terms of, what I want to know what's right. And then there's a kind of, you'll know if you had listened to me lately, I'm very into this zero-sum fallacy thing. It's one of these kind of innate biases in humans. Zero-sum fallacy means, in order for me to be right, guess what you have to be? Wrong, right? And so there's this little trick in our wiring that gives you, you're initiated at birth. It's not one of those where you have to be baptized into the cult of shouldism. You kind of get like, at birth, you're baptized into the cult of shouldism, that we're wired up to want to know who's right, and therefore, who also is wrong. Okay. It's a hidden zero-sum game that requires someone else to be wrong. We'll find that when we could be playing such fruitful inquiries, we could be playing inquiries like, what are the facts? Ooh, I love that game. Does anybody else like to play What Are the Facts? So that's a fun game. Oh man, let's find out. Like, are there figures on this? Did somebody do it? What about the titers and the serums and the, I don't know, what other sciencey terms? We could also play games like, what are my values? Ooh, does anybody enjoy playing that game? What are my values? Or what are your values? Oh, that's why the joys and concerns thing is so fun, because we're playing what are my values, what are your values? That is a fun game. But instead of playing those games, we go 10 rounds of who's right. I think it's me, right? We are members of the Church of Shouldism. We are innately religious beings. You can be cult deprogrammed from this church, but I'd like us to know the context that we are working from. Okay, I bring this up because of that quote from Einstein, which I've simplified. And the quote, you'll hear it kind of goes like, this is kind of a mainstream in the realm of we trying to reconcile science and religion types. This is how it goes. Science endeavors to tell us how things are. I underlined that, so that's what that tone was supposed to mean. Tell us how things are. Religion endeavors to tell us how things should be. Science endeavors to tell us how things are. Religions endeavor to tell us how things should be. And with this, you get two very clear domains. There's murkiness. That was part of my long struggle to figure out how to narrow this down into a functional talk, is that there's a lot of murkiness in there. But for practical purposes, you can start with thinking of those as two pretty clear domains. How are things? Well, how do we want them to be? How should they be? And this is going to be the foundation by which we end the battle. Religions endeavor to tell us how things should be. The religions of the world, you probably know, have not been a slouch about this. They have taken their job of telling us should very, very seriously. They've been shoulding all over us down through the ages. There's a hyphen, shoulding. Okay, but should can have different meanings. The word should can have different meanings. So if you're in like hippie nonviolent communication circles like myself, like should's kind of like a no-no, because one of the ways is what I've been explaining so far. It's a normative statement. So, oh, you shouldn't wear those ripped jeans to church. Oh, you should though. You should, in my opinion. Right? If you follow it with my opinion, it works pretty good. But have you ever been to a church or a school or something like that where there were these shoulds? You should or should not wear. But Katie, are you wearing white after Labor Day? Or no, what's the rule? I forget. Right? Like, there's these normative statements. And then even worse, have you experienced, don't shout out, but you can wave or waggle your eyebrows or something like that, so we know we're a community. Have you experienced where this word should is used as a shamifying tactic, right? This should this way and this should this way. So religions around the world have not been lazy about their job of telling us how things should be in that sense. The good news is that should can also have another meaning. And this is part of where the problem comes in. In addition to zero-sum fallacies, I'm very into how the ambiguity of language causes a bunch of unnecessary problems for us. So words like should sometimes mean, you shouldn't really look at people like that. And we're trying to make some like shamifying normative statement. And then at other times we use should to express the values of our heart. Like when I say, a quote from a previous sermon, a good society should prioritize the needs of its citizens, right? When I'm saying that, I'm not always saying that if you disagree with me, you're not a nice person. But I am always saying this is the type of society that I long for. When I say, oh, it should be this way, it's my statement that that's what I want to bring about. That's what I would love to contribute. That's the society that my heart calls for. So this word should, the church that you're already a member of, whether you knew it or not, is an ambiguous term with many valences of meaning. Okay, religion, like should, at its worst, is just shame-laden cultism. I think we've seen this before. Like should, religion at its worst is just shame-laden cultism, denying even the evidence of one's own senses, let alone scientific consensus. That was pretty alliterative. I didn't even mean to do that. Denying even, so I'm going to read it again in case you didn't notice, even the evidence of one's own senses, let alone scientific consensus. But at its best, religion is about what inspires us, what we hold deep in our hearts. It's about faith in the etymological meaning, which is related to fidelity, that which we will hold true to. So it could be that the whole grand battle between science, bum, 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 and religion, bum, 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 is just a matter of good branding on the part of fundamentalism. Just good branding. Think about it. When you say religion, the atheists and the spiritual but not religious types like myself, kind of, will think, what will we think of, Reverend Fajun? I brought these notes in case my brain went blank like that. Oh, yeah. So us types will think immediately, you say religion, we think mega churches, prosperity gospel, and blowing away the COVID. I'm not going to blow on you. And like magical thinking and group thinking, we'll immediately think of this, and we'll think of the Spanish Inquisition, although no one expects to. The proudly religious, on the other hand, will likely, if you say the word religion, just this innocuous little word religion, will probably think immediately about how great their personal cult is. Just without just that word, it just triggers these things. It's really good branding. Fundamentalism has such great brand recognition that it is what we immediately think of when we say religion. It's like Band-Aids and Kleenex. Fundamentalism is like Band-Aids and Kleenex. If we are going to survive the chaotic growth spurt that our species, Homo sapiens, is going through, I believe we're going to have to rebrand what we mean by religion. Notice there's not a lot for me to say about science. I think a lot of science is doing just fine. If we're going to end the battle, I'm pretty sure the lion's share of the work is actually going to have to come from religion. But let's see. Let's see. Do I have any evidence for that statement? I don't know. Am I a scientific thinker or not? Okay, we're going to have to rebrand religion as something that is not by nature in opposition to science, evidence, and facts, but can exist in a complementary domain. So just briefly, what we tend to think of as religion in James Fowler's Stages of Faith, in case you want to go do a lot of reading that may or may not be exciting to you, he calls this the mythic literalist stage of religion, and then somewhat the synthetic conventional. So it's religion as you take whatever the myths to be are true. Moses literally had to part the Red Sea. Jesus literally had to curse a fig tree. But why, Jesus? I just, but if it's in there, your ticket to heaven is belief itself. And in some ways, for mythic literalism, the more outrageous you can make the belief that you can climb to that level, the more sort of spiritual you are. Synthetic conventional is similar. It's about that normative aspect. The good news is these are not the only types of religious experience available to us. In Fowler's work, he goes all the way through the individualist level, where you start to interpret these myths, and you say, oh yes, the cursing of the fig tree, what does that say to me? And then like our Universalist and Unitarian ancestors, you might go, that doesn't say anything to me. I'm never including that in a sermon. You get to extract the meaning. You get to find out, how does this speak to my real experience? And in Fowler's work, he says you can even grow all the way to a universalizing religious impulse, one which says that not just our cult has the ticket to heaven, but says things like Unitarian Universalism, that every single person has inherent worth and dignity. Okay, so I believe the best part of spirituality is that it gives us a poetry of our values. It gives us a poetry of our values, rather than being something that's defined by denying the evidence of our senses. The best part of religion is something that can give us a poetry of our values. It's why humans have always had myths and likely always will. We need a way to relate to the open-endedness and mystery of our situation as living beings and bring meaning to our humanity. So as we think about that, I'll select little pieces and read them again. Is there anything in that that needs to be opposed to, like a scientific consensus on climate change, right? A poetry of our values. What is it? Relating to the openness and mystery of our situation as living beings. None of that puts you in opposition to science, but it gives you the heart of what religious experience can be for us. Carl Sagan, here's the quote I found. It's a really good one. So get ready. Carl Sagan said, "A religion old or new that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by the conventional faiths. Sooner or later, such a religion will emerge." Ooh, Carl, I like it. I like it. You know, Carl Sagan also got a lot of flack because at the time when he was starting out, the bastions of science didn't think that popularizing it for the commons, you know, like we inherited some Victorian Edwardian weird stuff that, oh, don't try to take it down to where the common people can understand science. What are you doing, good sir? And I think he kind of, I don't know, made a mystic gesture at them or something like that. Perhaps he understood something that his colleagues did not. We need to experience our world through the lens of what Unitarian Universalists call transcendent mystery and wonder. He wasn't creating religion, but he did see how to speak to that aspect of our humanity. So that's the basic idea. I get to give you practical tools with this, but that's the basic idea, that the great battle between science and religion was a big old false dichotomy. It's just a big old false dichotomy. And you know how I love just pointing out false dichotomies. A big old zero-sum fallacy. For spiritual experience to be authentic, the world has to be 4,000 years old. No, come on, they can coexist. Good gracious. For science to be right, religion has to be wrong, and vice versa. Our need to be right, and thus create enemies against whom to battle, baited us into unnecessary conflict again, as usual. So how do we apply this to our real lives? This is, as I was trying to boil down this sermon, okay, well, there's that, there's this rhetorical fallacy, and oh gosh, am I going to have to read the structure of scientific revolutions finally in total instead of just reading the bullet points on Wikipedia? I don't know. And the thought I had was, maybe we could try to make a sermon that was actually useful to your real lives. Because it's cool to, I mean, I hope, please give me some positive feedback. It's cool to think about this science and religion, and right? It's fun to okay, it's fun to ponder. They said it's fun to ponder, so I believe them. And you should believe them too. But even more fun, perhaps, is can this give us tools for our real life? Because I know some of you have like had or witnessed with chagrin one of these weird Facebook conversations that people get into, and they just spiral out of control. It's terrible. And then some of us, especially in the last 5 or 6 years, we get into seemingly innocuous conversations with old friends or family members, and then again they're just like they're at the relationship breaking point. And a lot of it comes down to, especially, speaking to this congregation, a lot of you are going to speak from an evidence-based seat. Well, let's look at what's the evidence here. And if you run into someone who's having a different kind of conversation, it gets hairy really, really quickly. Okay, and then let us, who at least think we're scientifically minded, let's not let ourselves off the hook as well. Because if we then dive right back into the battle, that one stance has to be right and the other has to be wrong, then we've contributed to that kind of conversation that we dislike so much. So a couple of tools by which we can manage this. Oh, yes. He says, this is not something happening only in the vaunted ivory towers of distinguished philosophers like myself. It's happening in our real conversations, elections, and relationships. So here's the protocol. The first thing you need to know, in case you're taking mental notes, is anytime you hear the word should come up in a conversation, realize that you are no longer talking about facts, you're talking about religion. The other person in the conversation may sound like they're talking about evidence-based practices and figuring out what's true and false. If the word should comes into the conversation, and it's not something like, based on this trajectory, if applied, then subject A should behave in this fashion according to, no, nobody ever uses it that way anyway. So if you hear the word should, assume you are talking now about religion. What I'd like to suggest is that we frame that when you hear that to think, oh, we're talking now about the poetry of our values. We're talking now about the poetry of our values. Some folks, their poetry is of a meter that you don't find quite exquisite. Some poetry is not to your taste. Some don't like the iambic pentameter or whatever it's called. So some people are speaking in haiku, and they're culturally laden. They say the word fog, and they expect you to know the 18 culturally laden meanings in fog. We don't know those meanings. So if we relate to it, that we're trying to appreciate the poetry of the values, it's going to really help with the frustration that we might experience if we thought we were about to engage in a conversation about what are the facts. So if you hear the word should come up in a conversation, you can assume you're now talking about the poetry of our values. Proceed accordingly. In other words, what you've already noticed will be true. It looks like a time to examine the evidence, but it's actually going to be about what each party has already decided is true. If you mix the domains of science and religion, you'll find yourself embroiled in the centuries-old war. So when they start in, because they're obviously it would never be you who does this. So when they start in on their who's right, I want to encourage you to play one of the two other games. They ask who's right. Obviously, they think it's them. You know the truth, though. It's not them. It's the other character. But when they say who's right, you're going to slowly steer the conversation toward what are the facts or what are our values? Why go 10 rounds in a fight that you didn't even know you signed up for? There are much more fun games to play. If they can't play, what are the facts? So, some of us, we have gone so long without any opportunity to express our values that we can't play what are the facts until someone hears us, then listen to their values. And once They reach the point, there's this mystic point in a conversation that can be reached with these tools where they say, what's your stance on that? Once they ask, now we're in a really miraculous and beautiful place. We can play, what are the facts? Science. Or what are my values? Religion. Any good faith discussion, here it is, day of the good faith versus bad faith. Any good faith discussion is trying to explore one or both of these questions. Do an experiment, test me out, see if this holds true. Peer review process, tell me next week. Any good faith conversation is trying to figure out one of these two questions. What are the facts, or what are our values? And the good news is that any bad faith discussion, you can just ignore. You should not engage in any bad faith conversations. You've heard it from the pulpit, a normative claim. Bad faith conversations can be dismissed out of hand. If we don't distinguish these two questions, what are the facts versus what are our values, we muddle the domains together, and this gets us unconsciously, just despite our best efforts, it gets us locked into the duking it out. We think we're saying, oh, the facts say this, but we're actually trying to say my values say this, and I wish you would listen to me because it hurts me every time you deafen your ears to me expressing my values. If we figure out these two complementary domains, we can figure out how to use them to our advantage in good faith conversations. In conclusion, humanity is in a growth spurt. The chaos this has brought about cannot be denied. But just like the terrible twos and sometimes terrible teens, no offense teenagers, no offense 2-year-olds, you were in here either, or 2-year-olds at heart. But just like the terrible twos and the terrible teens, I have faith that our growths, that the chaos that's happening right now is because we are growing. Growth is always a process of transcending and including what has come before. The scientific method has moved us out of the age of guesswork and rumor and into the age of evidence-based practices. But if we ignore the innate human drive for worship, mystery, goodness, and inspiration, we're bound to see the regressive pushback that so surprises us today. When our edifices of myth are assaulted on all sides. When it all shakes down, science and religion are close relatives, and where I believe they meet is the shared virtue of humble curiosity. With this spirit, we can utilize the impulse toward meaning to help us hold fast to those human values we hold most dear, and our capacity for reason to help us discern what is fact from what is fiction. With these capacities finally cooperating instead of fighting within us, we'll be empowered to face together whatever mysterious future comes next.